Today we're out in Texas near Dallas taking a look at the 2018 Chevy Tahoe RST. This is the performance version of Chevy's full-size SUV. If you hear a few sirens in the background now and then, that's because Chevy decided to also bring along a few of the new 2018 Chevy Tahoe PPVs, and those are the police patrol versions of basically the same Chevy Tahoe we're looking at today. The Tahoe and the closely related Suburban are very big on chrome, but things are a little bit different in the RST trim. Instead of having a large chrome grille, we have a body-colored grille with black inserts. That change pretty much applies to the entire vehicle except for the headlamp modules, which are largely the same as the regular Tahoe. The cars we've been able to drive today have all been the very top-end trim of the RST with all of the available options. General Motors offers their full-size SUV in two basic lengths. Big, which is the model we're looking at right here, just about 204 inches long, and then even bigger, which would be the Chevy Suburban. The two-size strategy is made possible, of course, because General Motors sells so many full-size SUVs in America, and that allows them to have a long one for people that really need all that interior room, and the shorter Tahoe for people that would still like to be able to park this in your average suburban parking lot without too much of a problem. Although 204 inches long is still pretty long for the United States, it really isn't that much longer than a minivan or a full-size three-row crossover. Of course, we are here to talk about the sport trim of the Tahoe, so let's get back to the sport part. We have two 85/45 R22 tires on this vehicle, which are really wide for a full-size SUV. We have obviously these 22-inch rims here, blacked out yet again to mirror what's going on with the rest of the vehicle, and optional six-piston Brembo brakes up front. These brakes are positively enormous. In addition to the optional Brembo brakes, this particular model also has the optional Borla Sport exhaust. This generation of the Tahoe is really defined by its sharp, clean lines. We have tail lamp modules that are entirely on the body, black trim right here that helps smooth out the side view with the windows being flush right there to that side trim, and they even hide the rear windshield wiper under the spoiler up top. In case you're wondering, the rear glass still opens separately, and that is a really handy feature that we don't see in that many vehicles in America anymore because this costs a little bit more money to design than a hatch that is all one piece. Most of the 2018 Tahoes you'll see on the dealer lot still use the same 5.3-liter V8 engine and 6-speed automatic transmission that we've seen in the Tahoe for a while. But for 2018, the RST brings down Chevy's 6.2-liter V8 engine and the brand new 10-speed automatic transmission that we also see in vehicles like the brand new Chevy Camaro. This engine is good for 420 horsepower, 460 pound-feet of torque, and it also features General Motors' latest fuel-saving technologies, including direct injection, variable valve timing, and cylinder deactivation. As you'd expect with any Chevy Tahoe, you can get this in either rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive form, and the four-wheel drive model includes a 2-speed transfer case. Front seat comfort has long been a strong selling point for the Tahoe, and that continues for the 2018 RST model. This seat is actually more adjustable than some of the entries in the luxury segment. For instance, we have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support for this driver's seat, and you don't find that in the new 2018 Infiniti QX80. It's also worth noting that the passenger seat has the exact same range of motion as the driver's seat, and that is something that we see pretty typically in General Motors vehicles, but we don't necessarily find in all of the competition, like the Nissan Armada or again, the Infiniti QX80. To help the driver find an ideal driving position, we also have an electric memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column and power pedals. Moving to the rear, we find a generous amount of legroom, but of course these seats are a little bit less comfortable than the front seats. We also have a little bit less headroom because of the overall seating position in the Tahoe. Chevy decided to give their large SUV theater-style seating, so these seats are actually a little bit higher off the ground than the seat bottom cushions up front. The model that we're driving is the 7-passenger vehicle, so we have 2 captain's chairs right here in the middle, and then a 3-person bench seat behind. It's worth noting that like many full-size SUVs, these seats do not slide forward or backward, and they don't tilt and fold in a manner suitable to have a child seat remain in place and tilt that seat forward. However, if you get the 7-passenger version, because of the overall width of the Tahoe, it is very, very easy to get back here into the third row. Hopping all the way back into the third row, we find a little bit less legroom than we see in something like the Nissan Armada, but we actually get just a little bit more headroom back here than you find in the Armada or the QX80. Some viewers may be surprised to hear that you don't necessarily find that much more room back here than in something like the Chevy Traverse. That's because for the overall size of the vehicle, a little bit more space is occupied by the engine up front, giving us a little bit less room in the third row, although this row is wider than your average 3-row crossover. Taking a quick spin around the interior, we have a pretty standard sized moonroof. The model that we're driving has the rear seat entertainment system, which is this LCD that hangs down from the ceiling right there. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The leather in this model is sort of a nutty brown, and it's a little bit difficult to tell in the video, but the center sections of the seat are perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. The front doors are made from a combination of hard and soft touch plastics. We have soft plastics in the upper section right here, soft plastics for the brown section of the door. The Tahoe features imitation wood trim, although you can get, of course, a GM full-size SUV with real wood trim in it if you want to get the Yukon Denali or the Cadillac Escalade. The Yukon features imitation wood trim, but of course GM does sell plenty of full-size SUVs with real wood trim if you'd rather have that. Then we find harder plastics lower on the door right around the bottle holder. The soft touch materials continue as we move from the doors on over to the dashboard, where we find a soft touch section right here in the dashboard that is after stitched. And then we have a soft touch injection molded upper section of the dashboard. The glove compartment is a fairly compact bin style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside. The touchscreen infotainment system in the dashboard supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. This is General Motors' latest software version. As we've seen in a few other Chevy products, the screen raises up out of the position at the press of this button. Then we have a large storage compartment right behind the screen. There's also a USB port back there, so if you want to plug your media player in and leave it in the dashboard, you can do that as well. Below the infotainment screen, we find the physical knobs for the system, and then we find the controls for the 3-zone automatic climate control. The front 2 zones are controlled via these 2 large knobs and then the buttons between them, and then the rear zone is controlled via this button bank below. Between the front seats, we find several storage compartments, the first of which is just about the right size to hold a smartphone. We have 2 USB ports and a 12-volt power port there, but you can't close the lid with a larger smartphone in place. We then have 2 large cup holders. This is what the key looks like in case you're interested. If you'd like to clean the look up, we can close the lid on the cup holders as well. Between the front seats, we find a large, softly padded center console with a wireless charging mat in the middle. And if we open this up, we find a very, very large storage bin. You can see I have a whole ton of different camera equipment in there. This is also where we find an additional 2 USB inputs and the auxiliary input for the system. The center console is wide enough that we have these little ledges on each side for standard-sized letter-hanging file folders. The instrument cluster is a partial LCD design, very similar to what we see in the Chevy Silverado pickup truck line. We have a large speedometer on the right, a large tachometer on the left, and then everything else that you're seeing on your screen is delivered by an LCD. This gives us the additional gauge readouts that you see up top, as well as trip computer information, certain vehicle settings, navigation turn-by-turn directions, and of course infotainment readouts. The display's layout is also adjustable. There are 3 different skins that you can choose from. Heads-up displays are notoriously difficult to film, but no modern GM vehicle would be complete without one. The layout of the heads-up display is also adjustable, and this is a full-color unit. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design, and it's covered in a complementing brown leather that is not the same as the rest of the leather we see in this interior. That helps complete the 2-tone look that we also see on the dashboard and on the door trim. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the cruise control, the following distance for the collision alert system, as well as the heated steering wheel on-off button. On the right side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the voice command interface, phone button, and then the 4-way joystick that controls the multifunction LCD in the instrument cluster. You'll notice that there are really no infotainment buttons on the front of the steering wheel. That's because GM places them on the back of the steering wheel, where it's a little bit less distracting. We have track forward, backward on the left side of the steering wheel, and then volume up, down on the right. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find the buttons to enable and disable the parking sensors, lane keep assistance, adjust the power pedals, and then we have an integrated brake controller. If you do a lot of towing, I recommend getting an integrated trailer brake controller in any vehicle that you purchase. We then have the controls for the 4-wheel drive system. We have 2-wheel drive high, auto, 4-wheel drive high, and of course 4-wheel drive low. The controls for the headlamps, and then the controls for the heads-up display. Before we dive right into the drive section, let me remind you that we have been driving this out here in Texas, not on our own home test track, so these numbers and scores are all preliminary until we can get our hands on one for a complete week and put it through the regular battery of tests. In our testing out here in Texas, we ran from 0 to 60 in 5.8 to 5.9 seconds. Keep in mind that we are driving the 4-wheel drive version of the RST that is likely going to be just a little bit slower than the 2-wheel drive version. In terms of general comparisons, that makes this faster than the regular Chevy Tahoe, just a little bit quicker than the Dodge Durango with the 5.7-liter engine, depending on exactly what the traction situation is with the Durango or with the Tahoe. That makes this definitely faster 0 to 60 than Toyota's full-size SUV, but interestingly enough, just a little bit slower than the Nissan or the Infiniti. It may sound odd to compare a Chevy Tahoe to an Infiniti QX80, but the comparison is strangely valid because this top-end model that we're driving comes in right around $75,000 or so, as we'll talk about later, and that is decently within the price range of the QX80, which starts at around $65,000 and ends at around $90,000. One of the most important things to know about the Tahoe, on the road or off the road, is that this tends to straddle segments a little bit because there aren't very many full-size SUVs in America. When shopping in the large SUV segment, you need to realize that there are going to be a few unusual comparisons because the Chevy Tahoe and the GMC Yukon obviously cover very similar price ranges, although the Yukon does get a little bit more expensive and we find a few more luxury features in that top-end Denali model. But of course, if you want the full-on luxury SUV, that's where the Cadillac steps in. You could say that the Cadillac would be more direct competition to something like the QX80 or perhaps even the Nissan Armada in some ways, except that there's the price tag. Not every manufacturer has an entry in the full-size SUV segment, and all full-size SUVs in general terms, except for perhaps the Toyota Sequoia, have really gone upmarket in their latest editions. Now let's get back to RST performance numbers. In our braking test, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to zero in 125 feet, which is a very, very respectable distance for a large SUV like this. You can thank those Brembo brakes and the very, very wide tires. The wide tires also help the Tahoe handle better than most full-size SUVs out there. This definitely outhandles the Armada, the QX80, or the Toyota Sequoia. On the downside, in order to get this extra handling ability, the ride does suffer. Now, all RST models get General Motors' latest magnetic damping system. This is an active suspension system that adjusts several hundred times a second in order to try and give you a polished ride and excellent handling. But in the RST version of this full-size SUV, they have definitely tuned this towards the sportier side. So on broken pavement, this is going to be notably more firm than the base Tahoe. And that's why in terms of full-size SUV comparisons, I'm going to have to give this a C+ when it comes to the overall ride score. That's quite logical because, as I have said many times before, handling and ride are often two ends of the same teeter-totter. So this does very well when it comes to handling, but it does let you down a little bit on the ride, and that's just a balance you're going to have to decide. Cabin noise came in at 69.5 decibels, which makes this quieter than your average crossover in America, but not as quiet as the average luxury full-size SUV. That is, of course, quite logical because, again, this kind of straddles segments. It's a little bit difficult to talk about fuel economy because we haven't had this on our own home turf. However, GM has been doing very well at making their large V8 engines efficient. Depending on the terrain, we have been averaging between 12 and 19 miles per gallon, which is a very broad range. But again, we haven't had this on our own home turf, so it is a little bit difficult to talk about this. However, I would expect this to be more efficient than something like the Nissan Armada or the Toyota Sequoia. Even though we have more power out of this engine, that's not too surprising because we do get cylinder deactivation, direct injection, and of course the new 10-speed automatic. Now we should talk about the new 10-speed. Shifts are definitely fast and they're definitely crisp in this transmission. That makes logical sense, of course, because this is the same basic transmission that we find under the hood of the Chevy Camaro, where the transmission is definitely there for improved performance. But in the Tahoe, it has a secondary mission, and that is improved towing ability. The more you can keep an engine right in the meat of its power band, the better acceleration that you get, but also the better your towing experience will be. And secondarily, of course, is fuel economy, because the more you can keep the engine in its most efficient power band, the more efficient you'll be. Now, the 10-speed automatic doesn't really have that much broader of a ratio spread than the older 8-speed automatic. However, it does have more variations in between, and that means that when you're hauling a heavy trailer up a hill, this has more gears to choose from. That may sound a little counterintuitive to some folks, but if you've ever towed a large heavy load with, say, around 200 or 300 horsepower and an older 4-speed automatic, then you probably know what I'm talking about. Because as you're going up the hill, gear 2 might be just a little bit too low, so you'll accelerate, the transmission will shift into gear 3, and then you start decelerating because you just don't have enough oomph to help get that trailer up the hill. That's not going on in this 10-speed automatic. This takes everything that I love about 8-speed automatics and towing to the next level by giving those 2 extra gears to help you. Then, of course, there's the fact that this is a traditional body-on-frame SUV, so this is not going to tow like a traditional crossover. Towing is definitely one of the big reasons that you might want to buy a Chevy Tahoe over, for instance, a Chevy Traverse. Although you can tow about 5,000 pounds in a Chevy Traverse, it's definitely rated for that, the towing experience is not going to be the same as towing that same weight in a Tahoe. In the Traverse, you're definitely going to feel that weight pushing the vehicle around out on the road. It's not going to feel as peppy, it's not going to feel as capable as this. Towing that same kind of trailer weight in a relatively heavy body-on-frame SUV with 420 horsepower under the hood is definitely going to be a more pleasant experience. Overall, out on the road, the RST is exactly what I expected of this vehicle. This is definitely firmer in terms of suspension tuning than the 6.2-liter V8 Cadillac Escalade, but it gives us the same kind of shove in similar 0 to 60 times as that Cadillac model. The wide tires help this grip the road better than the average full-size SUV in America, and even better than many luxury full-size SUVs, again like the Infiniti QX80. The 6.2-liter V8 engine also has an excellent exhaust note. It's worth noting that this does have the optional performance exhaust on it, and it's really a very livable exhaust note. A decent number of performance exhausts introduce just a little bit too much drone into the cabin, they're just a little bit too loud, but this is just about perfect for my tastes. You can really hear the engine when you floor the vehicle, but in normal daily highway driving, it's really not an issue. It's nice and quiet and sedate. For 2018, Tahoe pricing in general starts at $47,215, and that would get you the 5.3-liter V8 engine under this hood. If you want the 6.2-liter V8 in the RST, that will set you back $56,515. That actually is not that much more expensive than a lot of the direct competition that will have around 400 horsepower, and it is notably less expensive, of course, than something like a Durango SRT. Comparisons with the Tahoe are a little bit tricky because this not only spans a very wide price range, but it also straddles segments just a little bit. Because we really don't find that many more luxury touches inside the cabin of something like an Infiniti QX80 than we find in top-end trims of the Tahoe. And of course, if you want all of those luxury bells and whistles, but a more mainstream brand, you could jump over to the GMC brand and get a GMC Yukon, relatively close relative to the Tahoe again, and get the wood trim and things like that inside in the Denali trim, or you could opt for the Cadillac, which will give you more opulence than you'll find inside the Infiniti, with a larger price tag, of course. But the reason I'm mentioning the Infiniti is because not only did we just drive the refreshed 2018 Infiniti QX80, but because the fully loaded version of this Tahoe RST actually ends up being a little bit more expensive than a base QX80, so it's right in the middle of that Infiniti price range. The Infiniti may be faster 0 to 60, but the Tahoe is definitely going to be the better handling vehicle, thanks to the wide tires and the overall way that this suspension has been tuned, especially GM's magnetic ride control, and that's something that we don't find in the QX80, even at this price. You might be wondering how this compares to the Dodge Durango SRT. In my mind, it really doesn't. This is really an apples to oranges comparison because the Tahoe is a traditional body-on-frame SUV. It has that very sturdy frame under there for excellent towing, off-roading ability, etc., whereas the Dodge Durango is actually one of the truest crossovers in America. And you heard that right, I did say crossover. That's because it's a unibody vehicle. It may be rear-wheel drive, but it is really a blending of car and SUV-like characteristics in one vehicle. The Durango is going to handle better than this vehicle. It's also going to be faster 0 to 60 because that really is its mission, but it's not going to be as off-road capable. It's not going to feel the same when towing large, heavy loads, and of course, it's likely not going to be as durable off-road as the Tahoe. Be sure and let me know what you think down there in the comment section below about the 2018 Tahoe RST. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. You can also head over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do. I'll see you next week.